Also, sorry we're getting started just a few minutes late, but if you'd like to, go and open your Bibles to Luke chapter 16. And if you don't like to, then I would like for you to. So Luke chapter 16, we're going to have some slides perhaps in just a moment up on the screen. Had trouble getting them to the proper spot, so we'll see if that's going to be there or not. But as you go to Luke chapter 16, we're going to start tonight and read starting in verse 19. Luke chapter 16, starting in verse 19. And it says, "There was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and fared sumptuously every day. But there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, full of sores, who had laid at his gate, desiring to be fed with crumbs, which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. So it was that the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried, and being in torments in Hades, lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off, Lazarus in his bosom. Then he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in the water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and you are tormented. And besides all this, between us and you, there's a great gulf fixed, so that those who want to pass from here to you cannot, nor can those from there pass to us. Then he said, I beg you therefore, Father, that you would send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, lest they also come to this place of torment. Abraham said to him, They have Moses, and they have the prophets. Let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if one goes to them from the dead, they will repent. But he said to him, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rise from the dead. All right, so I think we got everything. All right, good deal. So tonight we're going to do a deeper study and talking about Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through the end of the chapter there, and really focus on this idea about Hades. So a couple weeks ago when we had our 4th Sunday night question and answers, this was kind of approached a little bit, and I ran out of time, so I thought I would just spend an entire session just talking about this. What we're going to do is we're going to have several questions that come up on the screen, and I want you to answer those questions as we go through it, and we'll see how that works. And just remember that this is a class type setting, so feel free to raise your hand or make comment or yell out something, just whatever as we go. All right, so what happens in death? What happens in death? I gave my answers already up there. So if you were to describe what happens when someone dies, what is that death? All right, the spirit leaves the body. So over in James chapter 2, when making the point about faith without works is dead, makes the point also just as with the spirit without the body is dead also. So when we die is when the soul/spirit separates from the body. Okay? Second question I want to ask is, what happens to the body at death? What happens to the body at death? All right, decays. What else? All right, returns to dust. Ecclesiastes, right? That's what the preacher says there, that the body returns to dust from which it came. All right. What happens to the spirit at death? Say what, Josh? All right, angels bear it to this place that's described here in Luke chapter 16. All right, it is interesting. I love that Whether it's literal or figurative, whatever the case may be, it's a beautiful picture of what happens to Lazarus when he dies. Look there in Luke chapter 16 again, and look what it says in verse 22. So it was that the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. That's the New King James Version. Some of your newer translations might have Abraham's side. Okay? Beautiful picture there. And so if he is being carried, what of he is being carried? Because it's not his body that's being carried. All right, it's his spirit. All right, his spirit or his soul. And the reason why I'm using those words interchangeably is that many times in the New Testament they are used interchangeably. In the Greek thought, there is sometimes a triune nature of an individual. In the Hebrew thought, sometimes there's a dual-natured individual, but the New Testament uses those terms at least sometimes interchangeably. So I'm using that in that way right now too. Okay? So when a person dies, body goes to the grave, goes to a tomb, goes to a crematory, goes to the sea, goes to wherever. Okay? It is the body. It is the outer tabernacle, if you will. Okay? And it decays and it dies. It eventually becomes like the dust which it came from. The spirit then goes somewhere else. Okay? And so that's what we want to think about tonight. Where does the living spirit of a dead person go? Well, let's do this. Where does not the living spirit of a dead person go, first of all? All right, it does not go to heaven per se. All right, we do a lot of things in our life to make people feel better. All right, one thing that we do is when someone dies, we talk about death, first of all, in a way that makes things sound better. You know, we don't say, well, someone so-and-so died all the time, because the saying that, it comes off very harsh. We would use euphemisms, right? We would say what? Someone passed on. Someone passed away. There's in the New Testament, many times they refer to it as sleep. Okay, because obviously a dead person looks like they're asleep, unless they die and their eyes are still open. Then they look like a creepy dead person with their eyes open, okay? But, so we use those euphemisms. And the same thing we do a lot of times when we talk to somebody about someone who has died, we refer to them as perhaps that, oh, they are in heaven, right? My so-and-so is having their heavenly birthday. Or so-and-so, a loved one, is looking down from me in heaven, perhaps. Okay? I'm sorry, was there a hand question? Yes, sir. Yeah, in Acts chapter 7, when Stephen is stoned, he looks up to heaven and he sees Jesus standing at the right hand of God, and he even uses an expression about how that he was longing to be there with him. Okay, so we'll talk more. We'll look at another idea about this heaven thing, because I will tell you this: I am not positive whether someone goes to. It's not going to be their eternal abode as heaven yet, because you cannot experience the eternal abode of heaven until you are given a new body. That's from 1 Corinthians in chapter 15. But we'll look at a text here in just a moment that may help us out. But something else you do not go to is when a person dies, they do not go to purgatory. Okay? Purgatory is not a thing in the New Testament. Okay? This is a Catholic belief. And the idea is that as long as you have not committed a sin that is a damnable sin, that sends you straight to hell, if you will, then perhaps you can go to purgatory. And while in purgatory, there are things that can be done for you by those who are living to try to get you out of purgatory so that you will eventually go to heaven. So it's not a great place, but it's not It's not hell either. It's not final punishment. But that is something we do not read about in the New Testament. There's only one concept of that ever mentioned, and this in 2 Maccabees, which is one of those intertestamental books. And even then, it is just an illusion about people praying for those who have died. And it's a doctrine that's not found in the New Testament, okay? But also, we always mentioned that when someone dies, that does not seem to be from Scripture that they go directly to heaven or to hell. But there is a caveat with this, okay? Look over in Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. Now, I think it's important for us to come into the text with being humble and realizing that we can only know what we know, and what we don't know, we can't know, and we shouldn't always try to know what we can't know, because then we might not know something that we need to know, and if we did know that, we wouldn't know what all the other stuff we want to know. Hopefully you know what that means, okay? So look over in Ephesians chapter 4, and it is this passage that has some thinking, and that's why I have that little star there, that perhaps some people now do go directly to heaven in a way. Okay, notice what it says there in Ephesians chapter 4 and in verse 8. It says, "Therefore he says, when he ascended on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts to men. Now this he ascended," what does it mean? "But that he also first descended into the lower parts of the earth. He who has descended is the one who ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fulfill all things." So here's the idea, is that Jesus, when he died, that he went to what we're going to refer to as Hades here in just a few moments. And a part of that, when he ascended, so he died on that Passover weekend, he was resurrected on that Lord's Day, and then it was some 40 days or more before he actually ascended up into heaven. Remember, that is not seen until, Acts chapter 1, right? And he is gathered around with his disciples, and he ascends up into heaven, and the angel's like, "Hey, why are y'all looking at this? He's gone, but he will come again the same way as he left," right? And so that is when he ascended into heaven, and the thought is that he took those who were captive in Hades, those righteous ones in Hades, and he brought them up with him. And so there is some who say that when someone dies now on this side of the ascension, that you go directly to wherever those people are now, where Christ is in heaven, if you will. Okay? And you also think about, there's so many times that Paul would say, well, is it better for me to stay here on earth and to do this work, or to be where? Or to be with Christ. So then some way Paul was thinking that if he died, he was going to be with Christ. Now, while Paul lived, was he with Christ? He was with Christ also while he lived. Okay? So I am not dogmatic, put my foot down saying that this is the way it has to be, because I don't think it's clear as far as the New Testament is concerned. Notice this also. Look over in Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2, and in verse 34, it says, "For David did not ascend into the heavens, but he says himself, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool." All right, so when Peter, who is preaching in Acts chapter 2, uses David as an illustration, we're talking about King David here, where does it seem to be that David is at this time? Or where does he seem not to be? He does not seem to be have ascended. Because it says here, for David did not ascend into the heavens. Now, if David is considered one of the righteous dead, and this is after the ascension of Jesus, and Jesus takes the captivity captive and brings them up with him, then you would expect that David is there also. But this may be Peter talking about what David said back then, and obviously David back then had not ascended yet. So it comes down to this. I don't know. All right? And if anybody tells you for sure they know, then, but just look at the evidence that is there, and it's one of those things that I don't know. But as far as what we see as teaching in Luke chapter 16, when someone dies, their physical body goes to the dirt, and their spirit is taken by the angels and goes to this other place there. Okay? So, any questions about that? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. To the thief? Yes. Great question. So we're going to look at more of that in just a minute. In Luke chapter 23, when Jesus is hanging on the cross, he talks to the malefactor, the other person that's hanging on the cross next to him, one of the thieves, as sometimes it is translated. And there he says, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Okay? So what we can glean from that is that wherever Jesus was going, the thief was going also. And Jesus refers to it as paradise. And so we're going to find out in a minute, perhaps, where does Jesus go when he dies. It is my stance that wherever Jesus went when he died, because he was human like you and I, we too go when we actually die here on earth. Yes, Philip.
But I guess at that point, Steve did see Jesus as the right hand of God.
Right. Yes, so he dies, and then later on he resurrects from the dead, and then he ascends into heaven, Acts chapter 1, and that's where Stephen in Acts 7 can look up and see Jesus standing. Fun fact, that is the only time in the entire New Testament where Jesus is said to be standing at the right hand of God instead of sitting at the right hand of God. You know, Hebrews chapter 1, he is sitting at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Acts chapter 7, he is standing up. The commentator, the preacher way of looking at that is that this was such an atrocity for Stephen to be stoned that even Jesus must stand up and view these things. You know, I don't know. It's an interesting little fact when you're on Jeopardy one day and they ask one of those Bible questions that they get wrong all the time. You can have that answer also. Okay, so where then does a person, where does a living spirit go when they die? We talk about this term Hades. Okay, so Hades is a Greek word that has been transliterated into English. Okay, there's many times in your New Testament that instead of translating a word, it transliterates a word. One of the most famous of those words is the word baptism. Okay, the word baptism is not a translation of the word. So if you get to Acts chapter 2 and verse 38, right? Repent and let every one of you be, translate it instead of transliterate it, be immersed, right? The word baptizo means to plunge or to dip or to immerse. And so if we were translating it, we would give the actual meaning of the word. But when we transliterate it, we take a foreign letter and turn it into our common tongue letter and make it its own word. Same thing happens with the word Hades here. Now, what's sad is that sometimes in our English translation, especially in the Old King James, that the word Hades is sometimes transliterated as Hades, and sometimes it is translated as hell. But we're not talking about the same place there. Okay? Hell in the New Testament is the word Gehenna, which is many times translated hell, which has to do with hellfire. And every single time, I believe, every single time that the word Gehenna is used, it is from the mouth of Jesus. There's only one time in the book of James where, in chapter 5, where that word is used, and it's somebody other than Jesus saying it. So yes, Jesus was one of compassion and love, but He's also the one that spoke the most about hell in the New Testament. And the reason why He speaks the most about it is because He's one of compassion and love. And He doesn't want people to spend an eternity there. But the word Hades literally means unseen. Okay, an unseen place. And it was the understanding that Hades, the Hebrew word for it is Sheol, which is sometimes translated grave or sometimes in context just death. This is where the living spirit of a dead person would go. It would go to Hades. Okay? And Luke chapter 16 does some of the largest teaching about this place of the undead. Okay? So, a question about this. Where do the righteous dead go when they die? I'm sorry, what? The better side. Okay, the better side of Hades. All right? Let's realize, though, as far as what we're concerned with tonight, that all dead people, when I'm talking about people, talking about their spirit, all dead people go to Hades. Whether you be righteous or whether you be unrighteous. Okay? And I think it's important to differentiate between righteous and unrighteous. We're not talking about good people, okay? There's a lot of good people that are on the good side of Hades, and there's a lot of good people that are on the bad side of Hades, okay? We're talking about people who are righteous, and you're only made righteous by God's salvation that He provides for us, okay? So let's notice what it says there in our text again there in Luke in chapter 16 of what happens when Lazarus dies. Okay, and then we'll get to also this idea of paradise. Luke chapter 16, it says, verse 22, "So it was that the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried," and it talks about him being in torments. "And he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom." And then, let's see, in verse 25, Abraham said, "Son, remember in your lifetime you received good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things, but now he is comforted and you are tormented." So, in Luke chapter 16, this righteous dead person, Lazarus, goes to Abraham's bosom. All right? Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Bosom. What is bosom? What are we talking about here? Why are we using this term over and over again? What does it mean to be in Abraham's bosom? Yes, Josh. All right, so it's a reference to during this time the way people would sit at a table. Okay? If you were going to sit at Abraham's bosom, means that you were going to sit at Abraham's side. So you think about how that they didn't have seats like we think about seats and sitting at a banquet table, but instead they had a low table and they had little couches or pillows that instead of sitting on, they would lounge on. Okay? They would lean on like this. And so what we have the idea here is that now in death, Lazarus is in Abraham's bosom, meaning that he is right next to Abraham and he is leaning next to him almost as on his side. So what is the mental image that you're supposed to get from thinking about Lazarus at Abraham's side? What? All right, comfort. What? In his care. All right, relaxed, comforted. What are we... Remember, why would somebody be laying next to him? What are they doing? They're eating. They're feasting. The same guy that just wanted the crumbs to fall from a table, the same guy that just wanted a dog to come up and lick his sores, Now he is at a banqueting table with Abraham. And he is at a place of honor because he is right next to Abraham, Abraham being the father of the faithful. And so now he is right there beside him. So what we see is a great reversal. Just because his life was very, very difficult and horrible on earth does not mean that's what his life is going to be like, if you will, in the end. And so he is comforted. He is in a place of honor. He is now feasting, if you will, and he is with the most wonderful company of being by Abraham's side there. Okay, turn over to Luke chapter 23. This was brought up just a moment ago. Luke chapter 23. Now remember, the same person that wrote Luke chapter 16 also wrote Luke chapter 23. Okay? And in a moment, when we look in Acts chapter 2, who's the person that wrote Acts chapter 2? The same person that wrote Luke chapter 23 and also wrote Luke chapter 16. Okay? It's important to remember it's the same author all the way through it. So Luke 23 and in verse 43, Jesus on the cross, he says to the man that is hanging there, he says, "Assuredly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." All right. So, where does Jesus go when he dies? To paradise. That's what it says. Where does that quote-unquote thief on the cross go when he dies? Paradise. Where is Lazarus when he dies? It's paradise also. Okay? The word paradise, all it simply means is garden. Okay? So when we talk about the Garden of Eden or the paradise of Eden, it's just really a generic word that means garden. Usually a good garden, not a bad garden, but a good garden. You have the garden mentioned back there in Genesis. You have the garden that is mentioned here. You have another paradise that is mentioned in Revelation, which is looking back to the original paradise type garden. But this seems to be another terminology for the same place that Lazarus goes. Yes, Neil. When he's taken up into paradise, into the third heaven, there in what? 2 Corinthians chapter 12, right? So there the word is used also. Now notice Acts chapter 2. Notice this. Acts chapter 2, Peter on the day of Pentecost, when he's trying to make the point about the resurrection of Jesus, look what he says there. We'll start in verse 24. It says, "Whom God raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be held by it. For David says concerning him," okay, so this is a quotation from the book of Psalms from David, "For I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is at my right hand, that I may not be shaken. Therefore my heart rejoiced, and my tongue was glad. Moreover, my flesh also will rest in hope. For you will not leave my soul in Hades, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption." Verse 29, "Men and brethren, let me speak freely of you, of the patriarch David. He is both dead and buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. Therefore, being a prophet, and knowing that God had sworn with him an oath that the fruit of his body, according to flesh, he would raise up Christ to sit on his throne, he, foreseeing this, spoke concerning the resurrection of Christ, that his soul was not left in Hades." Now, if his soul was not left in Hades, where does that mean that his soul went? It went to Hades. So, you cannot be left in Hades if you never went to Hades, right? So, Jesus, when he dies, he goes to paradise, goes to Hades, goes to, if you will, thinking about it, Abraham's side, right? Abraham's side is more just a description of this place of paradise, right? That is where Jesus goes because of his righteousness. That is where he goes when he dies. All right, questions, comments about that? Yes, ma'am. So Judgment Day is a sentencing, all right? Before you are sentenced, do you know if you are guilty or innocent? You can know. You can know if you did the thing wrong or not. We have the same thing in our court system even today, right? Where someone can be guilty or innocent, but it's not until the judge does the sentencing where he declares you guilty or innocent. Same thing is true as far as the Judgment Day is concerned. This is when Hades will give up all those who have died, and that is where they go into the sentencing. Those who are with Christ, or those who have been with Christ in their life, will go into the glories of heaven, if you will, and those who are not, well, there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So Matthew chapter 25. So yes, you know, but it's not final yet, if you think about it like that. And plus, after the sentencing in the resurrection, in the Judgment Day, is also when new bodies are going to be given. Okay, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, that which is corruptible puts on incorruptible, that which is mortal puts on immortality, where we are given new bodies where we can enjoy the joys of heaven, if you will, that we would not be able to enjoy, not in this body here. This body is going away, but we have to be given a new body because the spirit needs a body. And that is what is going to happen there. Yes, sir. Right? It may apply differently. That's one of those things that I don't know. And I don't know if there's anything in Scripture that tells us. The question is, what about the concept of time? If once we die, are we outside of the space and time continuum? Right? Is it different? Does it feel like that it's gone by very fast? How do you measure how fast something is? How do you measure how long of waiting that it is? It seems to be that Hades is the realm of the unseen dead, and they are there until Judgment Day. But what does that feel like? Does that happen? Are we waiting for thousands and thousands of years until Judgment Day? Or do we have no concept of thousands and thousands of years? Here is my very clear answer. I don't know. Okay? I don't, and it's one of those things that we can pontificate about, if you will, but I don't know if we can ever know for sure. Yes, sir.
So this punishment side of Hades, this is not the final hell. That's not the lake of fire where the devil are cast, right?
Correct. That's what it seems to be. Okay, so this side of Hades, the unrighteous spirits, go to this, what is referred to as a place of torment here. It may be, I am not sure, it may be the same type of area of Tartarsus that is used over in 2 Peter. There it is referred to as a prison. That is where the angels, the evil angels, are being held until the day of judgment. I don't know for a fact that these are the same place, but we do realize that this is part of Hades, and this is no fun. It's not an enjoyable experience. It is not eternal hell, because eternal hell will be eternal. Hades is not eternal. It does end at some time. But paradise of heaven and torments of hell does not end, okay? That is eternal, if you will, okay? Notice this as we're running out of time. What is the condition of the spirit in Hades? First of all, it is a conscious existence, okay? I don't know how time works. I don't know how feelings work. I don't know how all that stuff happens because you don't have a body that can receive those things. But whatever the case is that both of these people seem to be having a conscious existence. One is consciously being comforted, and the other one is consciously being tormented. They know that they're being tormented, and whatever that is like, I don't want to know, but that is what is happening here. They have the ability to recognize others. Here you have the rich man. He is able to recognize Abraham and Lazarus. I don't know if they had name tags on. I don't know what the case is. It is interesting that the rich man is able to look and to see Lazarus, but we never hear about Lazarus looking back and seeing the other. Now, he does have a conversation with Abraham, so that might bring us into other questions, but still, they're able to recognize others. Very similar on the Mount of Transfiguration, Peter and the other apostles there with Jesus, who could they recognize? Elijah and Moses. Again, I don't know if they had name tags or what, but they were able to recognize that's who they were. Okay, maybe they had like I mentioned before, maybe they had the Elijah and Moses trading cards when they were little and say, oh, that's him, and they recognized him. But also they're able to remember others. This man that is in torments, he is able to remember not only his former life, because he is told to remember that, but he's also able to remember that he has brothers that are back on earth, that are living, that he does not want them to be where he is. And so he desperately wants somebody to come back from the dead. And if just somebody would come back from the dead, then they would listen to him. Okay? Interesting foreshadowing, right, of something that's going to happen later on. Yes, Torrance. Right. How it is, say that again, I'm sorry. Abraham knows about the law and the prophets. Yes, I would definitely say that Abraham has, obviously he understands that the law and the prophets are there. How does he know that? I don't know for sure. I know that God is the God of the living, right? That's even the point that he makes over at Matthew 22, when he's talking to the Sadducees, he makes the point that God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When he says that I am, means that they are living, they are still alive. So maybe Abraham has some recognition of things that take on after his life. Again, these are a lot of questions sometimes that we can ask, and I don't know if we can find the answer to. And if we did have the answer to them, we might have even more questions about it. Okay? Yes, sir. Correct. That's what it seems to be. So if you think about a diagram here, right? And so you have on one side, you have paradise, comfort, side of Hades. That is where Jesus went when he died. That's where Lazarus goes when he dies. That's where all that are righteous go when they die. There's a great gulf that separates the two. And then on this side, sorry for y'all sitting on this side, on this side is the torment. My wife's sitting on that side, so I had to make sure that was the paradise side. So this side is the torment side, okay? And one cannot get from one place to the other. In the end, on the judgment day, Hades gives up that which is dead, and that is where we have the judgment. Oh man, we got so many questions. Okay, let's back here, and then we'll go to Philip. Yes. Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. So again, I don't know. I mean, I think we didn't realize, like you said, figurative. So the point of that is that they are going to be redeemed, that those people who have been slain because of their stand for the truth, that eventually they will be redeemed, and they're crying out how long, how much longer. They're asking those questions. But again, like I said, I still don't know how time works in there. Yeah, but that is interesting. At least they are asking that question. Yes, Philip, you win for the last comment of the night.
1 Thessalonians 4:16.
Mm-hmm.
For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout and the voice of the
Right.
It seems like they're meeting.
Yep.
It doesn't seem like Jesus is hanging out with them.
Yep, perhaps. And again, I agree. That's where I'm at. Some others would come back to say that it's referring to their bodies that are rising, that are going to be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye. But this is one of those things that if you do not know for sure every single little thing about what happens and where the soul or spirit is going to be at the time of death, just know this: you need to be in Christ, okay? And we'll talk about some of those things here in the devotional part in a moment also. But thank you for all your time and attention. We'll have more things we'll talk about next week. And then also remember that on the fourth Sunday, we have a time of question and answers also. So if you'd like to have a question answered, please submit that to my email. If some of you have already asked, but if someone asks a better question that was already asked that I want to do, I'll just skip you ahead, okay? Because I get to do that, all right? So, but thank you for all of your time and attention for this class part. We'll now enter into a time of worship together.